Hello, I'm Stephen and this is the second video about my Dodge weapons carrier. In this episode I'll be looking at some of the maintenance that I've done, plus additional conversion work to enhance the flying control character of the truck. Even on the drive back from Kendal I realised the brakes needed some attention. The Dodge was pulling to the right when braking and the brake pedal was a bit spongy. So one of the first maintenance jobs was to strip down the brakes and check everything over. Close inspection of the master cylinder showed signs of brake fluid leaking from under the rubber outer seal. Once stripped, it became clear that the seals were worn and the bore was marked. I considered giving it an overhaul but decided just to replace it instead. The wheel cylinders were next, and what a shop of horrors that was. The front right brake cylinder was working fine. The front left showed no sign of leaking, but further investigation showed that it was corroded and seized solid. That's why there was no leaks. Both the rear cylinders looked okay, but the rubber seals were failing, causing more leaks. I bought two replacement wheel cylinders, which were fitted to the front of the Dodge, and the good front cylinder was moved to the back, with one of the rear ones cleaned up and new seals fitted. One of the rear wheels had leaking oil seals, so both the inner and outer seals were replaced. The leaking rear cylinders had contaminated the brake shoes, so they needed to be removed. When the drums were removed, it showed more historical bodging. The horseshoe clips that hold the shoes up to the pivot point were missing and replaced by a figure of 8 of coat hanger wire. New sets of horseshoe clips were ordered to replace them. With all 4 shoes removed, they were taken to a local brake and clutch overhaul centre and they were relined. The new shoes were fitted to the front of the Dodge, while 4 good originals were moved to the back. I tried to change one wheel after it seemed a little bit out of balance, only to find that the spare wouldn't hold any air. A local garage helped to split the very stubborn rim, revealing a split in the inner tube near the valve. The inner tubes were the same size as some tractor front wheels, so I spotted some on eBay and ordered a couple of spares. Looking at the electrics came next. There were a number of things that I wanted to check over or change. The 6-volt lights are small and about as bright as a candle, so I wanted to do something that would improve the visibility, especially on modern roads where it seems that everybody is out to kill me. Another little job was to fit a replacement horn wire. The original wire had a number of breaks in the insulation, possibly going to cause a short, so a new wire was soldered to the end and pulled through the steering column. I found another small fault as a result of some starting problems. I traced the fault back to the distributor and discovered wear in the insulation on the positive feed wire. This was shorting on the distributor case, so it was wrapped in a few layers of insulation tape and all was well again. Now on to the lighting upgrade. The wartime lights are small and tucked under the rear edge of the body. I found some ultra high brightness 6-volt LED clusters on eBay and decided I could rework the original sealed fittings. The lens housing on the front was removed by gently peeling open the metal tabs holding it onto the main case. The inside was cleaned up and painted silver. The bulb inside was carefully broken, leaving the wires intact. A plywood mounting plate was cut to fit inside the housing, and the brake and tail LED clusters were epoxied to this plate. The LED fly leads were then soldered to the bulb wires, and the bare wires then sealed with silicone to insulate them. The lens was then refitted and the whole lamp put back together. This picture shows a comparison between the 6-volt filament bulb and the LED versions, while the third image shows the brake lights on too. The indicators were given a similar treatment, but in this case the LED cluster was mounted directly onto a BA15S fitting for direct bulb replacement. A small cosmetic job that was tackled early on was to clean up the axe, shovel and pick. They were looking quite tatty and needed some treatment to protect the wood. They had been painted olive drab at some point in the past, but much of that paint had now flaked off. The wood was quite dry and splintering a little bit in some places. The metal work was first treated with a rotary wire brush, followed by electrolysis to get the rust out of the surface pitting. All of the woodwork was given a good sand to remove the remaining olive drab paint. Rather than oil the wood, I decided to treat them with dilute waterproof PVA glue. Multiple dilute coats were applied and left to soak into the wood. The metalwork was all painted in satin black paint, left over from doing the accessories on the Ford Jeep engine. I've never liked spending money if I don't really have to. When the wiper blades perished and needed replacing, I didn't want to buy a new pair of wiper blades and holders when it was only the rubber which had failed. It was fortunate that I had a roll of 10mm by 2mm neoprene rubber strip, which was a pretty close match for the perished blades. A small diamond wheel was used to clean out the metal holder and remove all the remaining rubber. The metalwork was cleaned up, repainted and new blades cut from the neoprene strip. They were fitted back into the original holders and the completed blades were fitted back on the truck. By 2017, the rear shoes were getting worn to the point of needing replacement. An inspection during annual maintenance showed that the lining was almost down to the rivets in places. All 4 rear shoes were removed and taken for relining at the same place they did the front ones. They're seen here with the new linings fitted, waiting to be installed. I'd also started to have problems with the brakes being soft at the first press of the pedal and then firm at the second press. They were also slow to release and this caused some dragging of the shoes. I guessed correctly that the flexi hoses were starting to collapse internally. When stripping everything down, some of the brass unions wouldn't release, so I ended up heating them on the camping cooker to help free them. The blockages within the hose caused a pressure build-up and they eventually blew the hose out of its metal fitting, but at least I did salvage the brass unions. A full set of 4 new flexi hoses were fitted to the Dodge, and that fixed the braking problem. When I bought the Dodge, I wanted to make my own flying control alterations, some cosmetic while others were more functional. The Dodge came with some Norwegian canvas doors, but they didn't completely fill the opening in the side of the cab and let a really cold draft in. So with a spare wheel on the side of the Dodge as well, the driver's door wouldn't open, so I wanted to move that elsewhere. Airfield vehicles often didn't carry a spare wheel, so it didn't seem to matter that there wasn't one visible on the outside. Since I also wanted an observer's chair under the dome, a false floor in that position would help to hide the spare wheel and make a raised platform for the chair to sit on. It was also somewhere where I could put my toolbox and other display items out of sight. A steel angle frame was welded up and bolted to the sides of the bench seats. Then a 1/2-inch plywood floor was attached on top of that with machine screws. As can be seen here, the Norwegian doors were shorter than the hole in the side of the cab, and the wooden body had an opening that still funneled cold air into the back of the truck. Closing the sides and the rear doors would block the view needed to drive safely, so windows were the obvious answer. The front of the rear body was closed up with wooden panels, but a single window added to the left-hand side of the body so I could look backwards to the left. On the right side of the body, I cut 2 long windows in the folding panel. The doors at the back also had 2 large square windows cut into them. Due to the 1/2-inch thickness of the plywood panels, adding glazing straight onto the back would give a large lip to gather rain. Instead, I skinned the plywood with a thin layer of aluminium onto which the windows would be bolted. 3mm plastic glazing was then bolted through the aluminium sides with a sealant between to stop any rain penetration. The aluminium was then painted over with black and white checkers to match the original body and then wiped over with an oily rag to dull down the white paint. The large rear windows and those down the right hand side of the truck gave good visibility when needing to change lanes or seeing people who were overtaking me. In the early days of owning the Dodge, seeing all the way through the body and out through the front of the cab was a distraction to the planned radio display. I needed a solid wall across the front of the body here to create an end wall to the display inside. A friend offered me a GMC canvas curtain for a few pounds, and he also knew somebody with an industrial sewing machine who could do the alterations to make it fit. Eyelets were added to the top and bottom to allow the canvas to be bolted to the wooden front bow. This also helped to stop the wind blowing through the truck at displays. Even though it had a small canvas window of its own, the whole thing was rolled up for driving and only lowered at displays. When it was rolled up, it was secured by straps attached to footman loops on the front bow. This picture from 2011 shows the improvement the cab curtain made, giving a defined area for the display inside the back of the truck. Now we'll move on to the radio equipment that was installed in the back of the Dodge. This didn't happen all in one go, as when I first bought the Dodge, it only came with one BC348 receiver, a signal core speaker, some headphones and some other small accessories. Another friend had this BC348 receiver for sale, which I bought to add to the display. It had been butchered a little bit and had some non-original dials, and the mounting points on the bottom were also missing. However, it was still a good starting point for a display item. Finding the missing parts was challenging, and so I decided that making the parts was going to be faster and a cheaper option. This began with the mounting points, starting with a flat aluminium plate on the bottom. When complete, it would then need riveting in place. Attached to this plate there should be 4 studs. These slot into the FT154 shock mount tray. I bought a piece of aluminium bar to turn these studs from. It's a hobby lathe from the 1990s, so everything was turned manually. From memory, the bar was around about 1¼ inches diameter, so there was a lot of material to be machined off to make the 4 studs. Once the studs were virtually finished, the fragile string of 4 was then separated into pairs for final finishing. Here's the finished studs ready for fitting. I was rather pleased with the way they turned out. Each of the 4 studs had 4 rivets to attach them to the base plate, but I also used a little high strength epoxy on each one. The base was then epoxied and riveted to the bottom of the BC348 receiver. The studs on the bottom slid into slots on the shock mount tray, but there were also some locking clips to be made to hold them there. They were made from thin aluminium for the backplate and stainless steel for the sliding locking piece. They were riveted to the front of the radio base. The new receiver was also missing its handles. Fortunately, I had another receiver to copy from. I had some aluminium channel with a comparable thickness to the handles, and a strip was cut to use to make some replacements. It was heated and formed to match the profile of the original handle. The files came out next, and I slowly dressed the blank to match the original. Here's one of the finished handles ready for painting. The mounting points on the bottom of the receiver were only the first step in fixing it to the Dodge. I also needed the mounting tray to attach it to. I only had one FT154 mounting tray for the receivers. They're hard to find and also expensive. As I needed 2, the only option was to make one. I did find a company in the USA who sold the rubber shock mounts, so I ordered a set of 4. There was no point in trying to make this mixed material part that was cheap and easily available. More sheet aluminium work gave me the base plate. The shock mounts would be fastened firmly to this, allowing the top part of the tray to sit on the rubber mounts. The top part of the tray was a bit more complicated and assembled with a combination of welding and riveting. Here's the original tray at the back and my copy at the front. There's a few more years' dirt built up on the original compared to mine. Both receivers were incomplete internally, but looked complete from the outside. To bring a little bit more life to them, I was able to wire up the internal dial light to the power switch, so when the switch was turned on, the radio appeared to be live. In late February 2012, a big box turned up in the post containing the carcass of a BC375 transmitter. I was lucky to get a lead on this by chance at the Battle Group North show at the Yorkshire Air Museum at Elvington. I was chatting to the radio guy in the control tower about transmitters, and he told me about one of his friends that had 3 of them. He planned to make one working one, but may be willing to part with one of the carcasses of the others. He'd already taken the parts he needed, and this carcass and tuning unit were now spare. He offered it to me for a nice low price. It was missing the valve cover, the top, the sides and the back. The voltage gauge was also incorrect, but other than that, it looked good. I'd already found a rare FT151 mounting tray the previous month, cost me £170 on eBay. I ordered a voltage gauge online and made a dummy front and side panels from some sheet aluminium. The top and rear wouldn't be seen in the Dodge, and the sides had limited visibility. In July 2013, I spotted an original top and end panels on eBay. Several other people were watching and bidding on them, but I held off until the last few seconds of the auction and won them for around about £200. Like the mounting tray, I was unlikely to see another set available. The transmitter looked so much better with the original panels, even though its position in the truck limited the view of them. Here's a picture of the radio setup from 2014. The transmitter is at the top left with the 2 receivers and a set of headphones to its right. A second tuning unit is below, along with the speaker, microphone and switch box. Like the receivers, the transmitter was wired up to appear live. The voltage meter, current flow and power light were all connected up to the mains power switch. Most of the left side of the Dodge was taken up with radio equipment and signal lights. On the right hand side I planned a meteorological station, but it couldn't be too tall as I didn't want it to block the view through the windows when I was driving. I also still wanted to access the rear right locker. The original lid wouldn't have space to open, so I made a segmented roll-up lid that would still open below the instrument panel. This is the finished weather station. Across the top were temperature, pressure and humidity readings. At the bottom left there were 2 clocks. The Americans and British used different times during the war. The US used Greenwich Mean Time, while the British used summertime and double summertime. Some of the early US raids were escorted by British aircraft. so having both times on display in the truck seemed to make sense. To the right of the clocks was a wind speed gauge, which was to be connected to an anemometer. The last dial was the wind direction, and that was linked up to the windsock on the roof. In May 2011, it was time to upgrade the Norwegian canvas doors. As you can see in this picture, there was a gap of around about 6 inches between the door and the body. The rear body funneled cold air straight into the cab. The Norwegian doors were canvas over a steel frame, so not easily modified. Instead, I would make some fresh doors using the original hinge hardware. The doors were made from 1/4 inch plywood on a small timber frame. This is the passenger side door, with a cutout to clear the body, which extends forward of the roof bow. Both doors were covered in fabric and applied with waterproof PVA glue to give a weather-resistant finish. The driver's side door was a bit more complicated, split into top and bottom doors. The lower door also needed to have a small door of its own, which enabled it to open past the spare wheel bracket. Over the time that I had the Dodge in Flying Control colours, I needed to do a number of paint touch-ups and rust treatment. The hood was stripped back to bare metal before priming in red oxide primer. The hood was painted in olive drab next, so that any wear would show green first. It also gave better protection, as the black and white paint was just interior emulsion. The white was next, and once dry the checkers were drawn on with a pencil. The edges of the checkers were then hand painted first, before the rest was filled in afterwards. When it rained, the water would run across the roof and under the cab canvas next to the dome plinth. I added some wooden fairings to support the canvas at this point and stop the water ingress. When I first suggested the body modification to the previous owner, I told him to cover the timber with glued-on fabric to waterproof it. I don't know whether he forgot or just didn't bother, but particularly around the curved corners of the roof, it leaked. So in April 2011, the whole roof was fabric skinned, again applied with dilute waterproof PVA glue. Once dry, a couple of coats of ordinary glue were applied, followed by a coat of white paint. The checkers were once again marked out in pencil and then filled in with black by brush. Though not seen by most people, I marked the roof with the letters TA, standing for Thorpe Abbotts, the home base of the 100th Bomb Group. The main reason for buying the Dodge was so the whole family could travel to events together. In order for this to happen, I needed to fix my daughter's child seat inside. This was done almost immediately after getting the truck. The original child seat lasted quite well, but by 2015 it was clear I needed to make something bigger. By this time my daughter was in an ISOFIX car seat. Now if this had been built during the war, a B-17 pilot seat would have been available from one of the airbase hangar queens, so that could have been used in a flying control vehicle. So could I make the child seat support look like a B-17 pilot seat, and also have it detached from its support so it would mount under the dome as the observer's chair? This is the basic seat bucket complete, however there was still more work to do on it. The harness was bolted to the support frame. An additional frame is built across the top of the false floor, onto which the seat frame was then bolted. With the seat removed from its child seat location, it was then mounted on a tube pillar centrally under the observation dome and was free to rotate in that position. The Dodge was originally kept in a barn a few miles from home. The site was on the edge of a large open cast mining site. By 2014, the mine was knocking on the door of the storage yard and around the barn, so I had to move a couple of hundred yards to a new location. By the end of 2014, I'd used an old canvas ground sheet to make a curtain over the opening to keep the weather out. Then in late May 2016, I got the opportunity to buy a cheap used shipping container. I tried reversing the Dodge in so I'd have a better access to the engine, but with only 3 inches of clearance each side and not being able to see backwards very well, it was a real challenge. So the next time I came to put the Dodge away, I drove in forwards and climbed out through the rear doors. By April 2017, the open cast site was expanding again and wanted the rest of the land to mine. Fortunately, I found another yard even closer to home, only around about 3 miles, and the owner had a friend who could move the container for about £100. So on April the 11th, the container and the Dodge moved home once again. In March 2020, 2 days before the lockdown began, I could see what was about to happen, so I put the Dodge up on axle stands to take the weight off the wheels. The battery had already been removed for the winter, so that could be looked after at home. It remained perched on its axle stands for a year and a day, although I did go over a couple of times and warmed the engine through and exercised the brake pedal and the clutch. It made the 3-mile trip to the old house in Washington to blow up the tyres and give it a check over before making the 12-mile drive to the new house in Durham. It would remain parked outside waiting for some builders to rework the garage door so I could get the Dodge inside. But by September, with the winter approaching and still no sign of the builders, I decided to strip off the flying control body so that it would fit into the garage as it was. With the wooden body removed and the Dodge under cover, it gave me the opportunity to strip it down and repaint it back to olive drab. This was something that I'd been thinking about for a couple of years but didn't have the space in the container or at home to do the work. But that conversion is a story for another video. Goodbye.